All right. Hello, Cycle Online participants. Hello, everyone here. I have an honor to present to you the next speaker, which is the awesome Silenas, the president of Lithuanian Free Market Institute. Without further ado.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here. It's a little bit of an unusual setup. Usually there are more people listening inside the room than there are outside, but hey, we live in a wonderful world these days. Yes, I'm from Lithuanian Free Market Institute. We are a think tank. We've been in Lithuania for more than 25 years, and I think I have the best job in the world. I mean, I wouldn't really call it a job. It's more of a lifestyle. And when I say a lifestyle, I don't mean it like those hippies who mean it. Then they usually say that they're bad at any type of job, or being bad at jobs is that kind of lifestyle. No, everyone who works with us, obviously, it's more than just a job. It's a mission. It's a thing what we do. What I'm going to be talking to you about today, for this next half an hour or 40 minutes, is about inequality and why things are not so easy as sometimes politicians or policymakers or even academics would want you to think. So my point is, I'm not going to be talking much about the Austrian perspective on inequality. Nor will I be talking, why we shouldn't care about inequality. I would rather bring in some concepts or arguments or evidence that I think you, as liberals in a classical sense of the word, or as libertarians, could use against those people who would want to have more taxes, more redistribution, or the people who would say, if we have more taxes and more redistribution, we're going to have less inequality. So basically, we're going to be battling them on their own terms. And this is obviously much more fun than just saying that inequality is not an issue. First of all, just to clarify some things, whenever we say inequality, let's distinguish between some things. So when we talk about inequality, we're not talking about poverty. If we were to talk about poverty, well, quick news flash, poverty is in an all-time low. So when people talk about absolute poverty, it is at a record low. So basically, in past 30 years, inequality in the world has fallen dramatically, and it has fallen mostly dramatically in East Asia. Why is that? Obviously, well, East Asia has undergone capitalist or the move towards capitalism rather than communism, and the result of that is that that poverty is falling a lot. Another point is this is happening despite unprecedented population growth. Some people say, well, population growth is awful because we're going to soon starve. Well, the point is that we have way more people than we used to have before. So basically, everybody knows that the big population spike started exactly in mid 19th century. So we had a lot of people, and people have better diets than ever. If we compare an average European a couple of hundred years ago, his diet was, his caloric intake was around 1,700 calories, which is way less than 2,000 calories of what is recommended today. Now our average caloric intake is way above 2,000 calories. Well, probably for the first time in the world, we have more people who are overfed or obese than we have hungry people. But in my book, this is actually good. And all of this is happening, and the food prices are lower than ever. In other words, if people are complaining about prices of food stuff these days, I mean, they could have complained back in 18th century or 16th century. These days, food is at an all-time cheap. Why is that? Was obviously because of technology, because of investment, because of the things, because of technological progress. And the last thing, just for an introduction, is if you think that we're turning our world into some sort of industrial wasteland, where we would have no greenery or no forests or anything like that, well, this is actually quite the opposite. If you looked at the map of Europe, you would see that in past 110 years, Europe has been getting greener and greener. Why is that? Well, quite simple. Because people can get rich and live comfortable lifestyles from other activities, trade, commerce, services, etc. You don't have to be a farmer. 100 years ago, pretty much everyone, well, okay, not everyone, but a lot of people were working in agriculture. And I mean, if you look at this map, the green areas represent the forests, and the yellow areas represent arable land or cropland, same way when you would grow wheat. So what we can definitely see is that we have more forests, less area devoted to agriculture, and these little red areas which are cities. So Europe is getting more industrialized, Europe is getting richer, and Europe is getting green. So my point is, this very couple of, and the world is actually fine. The world is better than it was ever before. So if we talk about absolute poverty, there is nothing to worry about. Absolute poverty is at its all-time low. Obviously, then people say, well, you know, it's not so easy. We should talk about relative poverty, but relative poverty is really inequality. And this is where this thing sort of start talk about inequality really hits me. I'm fine to talk about poverty, and I think we should care about poverty, but we should treat poverty, or we should interpret poverty in a way that is sort of logical and in a way that we're used to. Or how I like to put it in very simple terms, you know, if you don't have a roof over your head, that's absolute poverty. We could agree with that, regardless of whether you're libertarian or socialist. You could agree with it. We could agree with it. Basically, if a person has nowhere to live, and it's not his choice. I mean, he's not a freegan or some other freeloader. That's actually bad. That's poverty. This is something we should be concerned about. But then people call inequality. Relative poverty. I think we have a problem. I think it provides the wrong type of mindset. It distorts the meaning of the word. Basically, what it means is that, you know, if you live in a one-story house and your neighbor has a two-story house, this is relative poverty. Well, this is not relative poverty. This is inequality. Your neighbor has a larger house. That's it. But you still have a house. So my point is, let's worry about absolute poverty. Let's not put so much emphasis on relative poverty, and let's not call it relative poverty. Let's call it inequality. So this is sort of my intro. Now, what about inequality? Well, probably we should have two main sources or two main distinctions of the inequality, and that's where people actually get sometimes confused. So we have income and we have wealth, and these are very two different things. Well, think of it that income is a flow. Sort of, if you think about the river, income is, you know, how much water passes through you when you stand in the river. Wealth is how much income you have accumulated or spent. So sort of, you know, wealth is like a lake, where, you know, where the water accumulates, like a bank. Once again, this might seem as a sort of academic distinction with no implications for the real world, but in fact it does, especially when we talk about inequality and we talk about what kind of people are in what type of situation. So imagine your typical, I don't know, typical young person who works in IT in Lithuania or in Belarus or in some other country. He's earning, let's say he's earning, I don't know, 3,000 euros per month. We think he's a rich person, right? And then we look at that that's our young person. Then let's look at our at an old person who is getting a pension, and let's say his pension is 300 euros. And in our everyday situations, you would say that the young person is a rich one, and the person who's getting his pension payments, especially if we're talking about post-Soviet countries, well, this is the pensioner, he's the poor guy. But actually, this is not quite true. This 3,000 and 300, this represents income. It does not say anything about how much wealth these people have. So if we sort of looked at those two people, probably this young guy, he probably has a loan for his apartment, which is at least minus 200,000 euros. He probably has a loan on his car, which is another 20,000 euros. So in fact, if this were income and this was wealth, from a wealth point of view, the young guy earning 3,000 euros per year is actually, he's not wealthy. He has a high income, but in terms of wealth, he's not an asset, he's a liability. He might earn this money in the future, but not today. And then again, your average pensioner or retired person, if he lives in a capital, he has an apartment which he inherited from the Soviet times. That apartment is worth at least 100,000. So in terms of wealth, ironically enough, the person who is retired has more wealth than a young person. So once again, this might seem as a small distinction, but I think it's a pretty important one. So this young guy, he has all the attributes of the wealthy person. He has high income, he has a nice house, and he has a nice car, but all of that is borrowed. He might become wealthy in the future, but right now he's a liability. And the old person, who seems like he's suffering and doesn't have a lot of money, he actually has accumulated quite a bit of wealth. So this is a distinction of income and wealth, which I think is very important. So the third type of so these are the two things explained. So the third type of inequality, which is very interesting, if these, let's say, income we usually measure during the year, or during 5 years, during some sort of fixed period. Wealth is how much wealth you have accumulated. There are some scholars who say, well, maybe we should measure lifetime inequality. Because you might have these sort of situations. You had a very good 10 years, right? You're a superstar, I don't know, 50 Cent or something like that. You have a very good life, and then you go bankrupt and you have a bad life. How do you measure your lifetime sort of experience? And there's a famous saying that the average drug dealer, the average income of the average drug dealer is that of a minimum wage. How do they calculate that? Is they say, well, then you're dealing drugs and the business is good, you earn very high income, then you get caught and go to jail and work on jail income. Your jail income is very low. It all balances out in the end. So, but when we talk about inequality, usually people talk about income and wealth. Lifetime inequality is a very interesting concept that needs to sort of be developed further. So we're only going to be talking about income inequality, obviously, but know that these other two things also exist. Okay, how is inequality measured? And this is where your standard economics comes in. And there are three wonderful ways to measure it. Who here has studied economics? A couple of people, so good. Refresh your course. If you haven't, even better. Okay, there are three cool ways to measure it, and these are how these work. So the first one is called Gini inequality, or Gini coefficient. Let me explain it how it works. So, actually, look here. So what this here says, it says, imagine that on the x-axis, we have all the people in the country. All people. And the chart is delineated, so we have 10% of people, we have 20% of people, 30%, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. So here we have 100% of people. So these are basically all the people in the country. Now imagine on the y-axis, you have all income in the country. So basically, all income, let's say, earned in 2015. And once again, now we have 10% of income, 20% of all income, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100%. Right? He says, well, and the interesting way about this Gini coefficient, they measure the actual situation with what they think the ideal situation should be. And the way they sort of say what the identical situation should be is that everyone earns the same. Well, everyone's income is the same. Now let's hold our moral objections to that later on. Just let's work the mechanism. So if everyone earned exactly the same, we would have a situation where 10% of people will get 10% of income, right? 20% of people will get 20% of income. 30% of people will get 30% of income, and so on and so on and so on. In the end, we basically get a straight line. At any of the point of a straight line, this is a line of absolute equality, absolute income equality. Right? And they say this is, this is sort of an idealized situation. Now, in the reality, obviously, things are different. If you looked at 10% of poorest people, they don't earn 10% of all the income. They earn much less, right? Why? Well, because they're poor. So the actual situation, 10% of people, of poorest people, is earning something like 1% of all income. 20% of people may be earning something like 3%, etc., etc., etc. So this would be the actual income distribution, or the so-called Lorentz curve. Now, haven't studied economics, This is one of the main. It's not just income you can measure. You can measure temperature, height, whatever. The point is how much the actual situation deviates from some sort of idealized situation. And this area here, to be broadly, this is the Gini coefficient. The larger it is, the larger the inequality in the country. It works. Imagine if let's take the popular sort of phrase that 1% of population has 1% of the richest population has 99% of income, right? That's how it goes, right? 1% has 99%.
Yeah. Can I? Regarding the equality curve, the 45 degrees, I had an impression that it's basically just a line to measure from. No one, as far as I remember, was claiming that it should be like this. No, because I mean, claiming that all people should be. I just wanted to double check if some people are actually claiming that everyone's still claiming that everyone should be getting the same salary or income.
Academically, you're correct. Nowhere do people say this is how it should be. My implication would be if this is the yardstick to measure the actual situation, and if people say that large Gini coefficients are bad, they are theoretically implying that. But technically you are correct. Nowhere would you say that Gini coefficient implies that everyone should be earning the same. But this is a sort of situation to be met. So if we took 99% earning 1% of people earning 99% of income, we would have just 1% of richest people owning 99% of income. Our Gini coefficient would be something like this, very, very high, very, 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 very large. So you get the basic idea.
Yeah.
So this is one way of measuring it. Sort of large Gini coefficients leads to a large Gini inequality. Or if you are an economist or work for Minister of Social Affairs, your job is to basically get this line closer to this. So this is one measurement. Another measurement which I'm really angry about is the so-called at risk of poverty rate. This is a measurement that is used widely by European countries as official part of national statistics and of Eurostat. And this at-risk poverty rate says basically what proportion of population lives below income of 60% of median income. Well, to put it in simple terms, how many people earn less than 60% of average? This is what it means.
60% of average.
Yeah. Put it this way. Imagine how this thing is calculated. So imagine you have 10 people to calculate their income inequality according to this methodology of at risk of poverty rate. Yes, thanks.
Sorry about that. I thought that one.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom.
So imagine we have a group of 10 people. One of them is earning 1,000, another one is 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, all the way to 10,000. Well, what's the median income? Median in this case is the same as average, but it's in technical terms, median means is a middle number. Why do people use medians instead of averages? Because averages are distorted by outliers. My favorite example is imagine 9 homeless people are in elevator. Why would they be in the elevator? I don't know, but this is my example, so I'm running with it. So 9 homeless people are in an elevator, their wealth is 0. The average wealth is 0. And then Bill Gates comes into that elevator. Now we have 10 people, and Bill Gates has around 60 billion assets expressed wealth. The average wealth of the person in the elevator is now, well, 60 billion divided by 10, which is 6 billion per person. Obviously, we know this is not true because all of that wealth is owned by Bill Gates. And all the hobos, they don't have anything. But the average, the way we calculate average is that average income or average wealth of that elevator is 6 billion. So averages are susceptible to outliers. So people say, well, instead of averages, let's use medians. You put all your numbers so from smallest to largest, and the middle number is your median. Income of that elevator would be 0. because of 0.000000006. Obviously, median income is 0, and it probably represents a situation better than 6 billion per person. The same here. To avoid these distortions, we need a median. Okay, what's a median income? Median income is 5,500. Yeah, if you have an even number of numbers, the midpoint is okay. 60% of median is 3,300. So these three people earning 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000, they are all, according to this methodology, we are all living in relative poverty. Or we would say that 30% of people in the sample live below poverty line, or in relative poverty. Now that might seem as a, not such a bad thing, but we'll consider this. Imagine incomes of this group has all of a sudden went up by a factor of 10. Everyone is earning 10 times more, and the prices haven't changed. So I know some sort of economic miracle has been enacted, and basically everyone now is 10 times richer. The person who had who used to earn 1,000 now earns 2,000. The person who used to earn 2,000 now earns 20,000. All the way to this guy who used to earn 10,000, and now he's earning 100 grand. The life is just basically 10 times better. Well, so imagine we added all these heroes here. The irony is that now the median would increase as well. The median would increase by a factor of 10. Now median would be 55,000. 60% of median would be 33,000. And these three people earning 10,000, 20,000, and 30,000, these would be living in relative poverty. This is where sort of that sad irony of the bad thing about these kind of measurements is that if incomes increase, the so-called line of relative poverty also increases. You have situations of very poor countries, like countries in politically incorrectly somewhere in Africa, and better in Denmark or United States, they have very similar of what this, measurements of relative poverty. Among 10 richest people in the world, probably 40% of them are living in, quote, relative poverty. Their yachts, I don't know, maybe the guy only has 1 yacht instead of 10 yachts. I don't know. This is the point. If this kind of measurement is susceptible to this sort of error, that if everyone's incomes increase, things don't change. And we observed that actually in Lithuania. If you Google Lithuanian media, if you Google things, let's say in 2006, media was saying every 5th person is living in poverty. What they meant is 20% of people live on the incomes which are less than 60% of median income. So that was in 2006, when times were good. Then times were bad. In 2009, our GDP fell by 15%, and 20% of people lived in poverty again. Now, if you Google it, still 20% of people live in poverty in Lithuania. So if you were a sincere person, you would say, well, how could this be happening? How could we be sort of recovering from a crisis and still every 5th person does not have anything to eat? But that's not true. Every 5th person does have something to eat. The point is every 5th person is living on income which is lower than 60% of the median. That is unavoidable. You might have a very rich society and you would still have people living in under this quote-unquote poverty. So for Lithuania, the number is 20%. I think for Denmark is something like 16%. So we say, every 6, does it mean that every 6th Dane is starving? No, it does not. The same when someone says every 7th American, or every 5th American, whatever number, is living in below poverty line, they usually mean this. And our colleague Sweets from I think from Timbro have some of this excellent evidence that your average impoverished American lives in a house, has 1 or 2 automobiles, household appliances, and basically living the life that many Eastern Europeans would aspire to. But technically, he's living in a relative poverty. So that's a second way of measuring inequality. Third one is the so-called quintile ratio. Quintile is a fancy word to say 5th. So you take, you take the people, the top 5th of people, you take the bottom 5th, and we see what's the difference in their incomes. So we sort of, once again, if we took this group of people that we used before, the quintile ratio would be, so the fifth richest divided by the poorest fifth, and we get something like 6.3. So obviously, the larger the number, the bigger the inequality. I think the actual number for Lithuania is somewhere about 5.5, for European Union is something like 4.8, etc., etc. I don't want to be sort of arguing about the numbers, but these are basically three ways how academia measure, or how economists measure inequality. So now you know that, we can sort of go a little further. So I would say, now that we know sort of these numbers, we could look at another point I want to sort of point your attention to, is that then people or economists are advocating taxation and redistribution. There are many good arguments against that, and those arguments come not just from libertarian theory, they come not just from sort of classical liberalism or Austrian School of Economics, which everyone knows who is in our group anyway, but there are many good arguments from the neoclassical point of view that are against this redistribution, or to be more precise, that they show that everything is not so simple with taxation and redistribution. So yeah, my point is that it does seem fine on paper if only if you ignore some fundamentals. So let's what I want to show is let's look at these fundamentals ignored in order to justify the distribution. Okay, so those of you who have studied economics, the first thing you learn, if you're in a semi-decent university, is that you cannot compare utilities across people. Or to put it in people's terms, there is no objective way to measure or to know, let's say, who of us, me or Lobo, likes this marker more. There is no objective way. There is no sort of internal measurement to say who of us value this more. Yes, there are prices, etc., etc. But if we want to look into what makes us happy, there is no objective way to measure. There's no objective way to say that I like this thing more than you do. What I want to say is, usually people say, well, rich can pay more because they have more. This is one way of looking at it. The more technical way of looking at it is saying, well, rich have so much, then just taking a little bit from them and giving to those who don't have any would increase happiness in society. What they're saying is that, if you get richer and richer, extra income matters very little to you, and if you're poor, extra income matters a lot. Now, that might seem as intuitive, but if we looked at from strictly economic point of view, you cannot really say that. In other words, you could have a situation when a person is like Scrooge McDuck, for instance, the guy from DuckTales. Now, you don't, obviously, because you're young people, but if you Google DuckTales, Disney character who is like an uncle of the Donald Duck or something like that, and he has this huge vault filled with money. He likes to swim in it, and he's very cheap. He's Scrooge. He values every penny. He's a sort of your stereotypical Rockefeller who is very rich but still goes and saves money. He's like a boss of IKEA. He's mega rich, but he still drives a beat-up Volvo and eats these meatballs at IKEA. So he's that kind of guy. So you could have situations where even loss of $1, even if you have billions, you lose $1, you are very unhappy. And you could have people who don't really care about money. If they have less or more, their utility is not affected. So what I wanted to say here, we could have these as a person, on a personal level, we could have these assumptions that, money don't matter to the rich that much than to the poor, but this is your personal imagination how the world works. From strictly economic point of view, you cannot do that. Okay, this is sort of little postmodern. So let's go a little deeper. Now, economists sometimes say they try to put it all into more technical terms, and they say, well, as a government or a society, we should be concerned with maximizing society's welfare. So this is not maximizing income. This is maximizing happiness, right? I hate those guys because I don't think you could really measure or maximize happiness, but there are those people. So the argument goes like this. They say, well, the argument begins with diminishing marginal utility. Well, let me explain to you what diminishing marginal utility means. Imagine you're thirsty and you're walking through a sort of through a desert, and you approach a bar. Now, once again, why would there be a bar in the desert? I don't know, but that's my example. So you're very thirsty, you really want to go and drink, and you enter this bar and you say, give me a glass of water, right? So here we have a number of glasses of water. Number of glasses of H2O, and here is your total satisfaction. Okay, so go ahead. You have your first glass. For days, your happiness. This is happiness. Don't know how you measure it, but whatever. This is your happiness. Right? That's your first glass. Then you say, okay, I'll have a second glass of water. You are still it's still enjoyable, but your total satisfaction has gone up, but not so much as from the first glass. Basically, the second glass is worth less to you. You drink a third glass. Your happiness still goes up because you're still thirsty, but now you're full. If you drink a fourth glass, your happiness doesn't go up anymore. It's the same. Now imagine a crazed gunman walks into a bar with a gun and says, "Drink more water." Now, because you don't want to drink anymore, but you have to, your happiness starts to go down. The fifth glass is not so much enjoyable. The sixth glass, you're really unhappy. The seventh, your sort of happiness goes into negative because you cannot drink anymore, but there's this crazy gun. So this was total satisfaction. If we could translate that into marginal satisfaction, your largest marginal utility or your largest happiness was from the first glass. Then it went down, reached 0 at 6, and went into negative on the 7. So the simple point is here is the more you have of something, the less you value it. Right? Easy to understand. You have only one pair of shoes, you're very happy with it. You have 1 billion pair of shoes, okay, that's too much. You have 100 pair of shoes, the 103rd pair of shoes does not give you so much happiness. So your marginal utility or marginal satisfaction of having more stuff falls. So this is the argument that the redistributionists make. They say, well, if we can have this with water, we could also have this with money. They say, well, rich people are so sort of to the right of this example that additional dollars doesn't matter anything to them, and vice versa. Poor people are so up on this side that extra dollars matter a lot. But once again, the mistake they're making is they're comparing utilities across people, which we decided you cannot do. Second point is, if we're talking about taxation or sort of redistribution, never ever really do we have these situations where there is a tax of $1 per rich person and $1 per poor person. Usually these kind of taxes are never enacted because they would be regressive taxation, and people usually don't like regressive taxation. So even, let's say, under flat tax, what is happening is, let's say you have 10% tax. Under 10% income tax, the rich person is already paying 10 times more than the poor person. And what the people who want to redistribute more say is, well, the person is so rich that $10 matter less to him than $1 to the poor person. And then again, that doesn't make sense because that would mean basically it just doesn't work that way. Because you cannot compare. You can ignore this and compare $1 for the rich person and $1 for a poor person. You can sort of make this approximation. But you cannot compare $10 from a rich person and $1 from a poor person because the quantities are different. So what I wanted to say here is that for people to make this argument, you would have to, sorry, I'm going to jump to 2. Number 2 funny thing is, imagine all of you have the same income or similar income, and now imagine every one of you have the same income. And I started taking $1 from each of you. So I would take $1 from these guys and give it to those guys over here. So basically, or I would take $1 from you and give it to Lobo, right? Woo! Yay! yeah, in terms of income, nothing really in terms of group income, nothing really changed. You would say, you are, and in terms of utilities, some people would argue, well, you are now you're a little less happy, but Lobel is a little more happy. So in the end, it all works out. Well, according to these same economists, the world doesn't work like that. And people actually, basically, that the magnitude of dissatisfaction of losing something is much higher than the magnitude of satisfaction of gaining something. A simple sort of lay person's example would be, imagine sort of in the morning you're walking down the street and you find 500 euros. Great. You put it in your pocket. You're thinking all day what you're going to buy with it. Then you go to the shop, you realize you just lost $500, those 500 euros. Now, in very simplistic terms, it would seem that you would have to be as happy in the afternoon compared to than you were in the morning. You found 500, you lost 500. The total number of money that you had, this did not change. So some people should say, well, there is no reason for you to be less happy. But you would be less happy because you had something and then you lost something. I bet it works all the time, even if it was 5 euros. You would be bummed. You say, ah, man, hadn't I lost those 500 euros, I would now be 500 euros richer. So the thing is that, or put it into this very scientific diagram, if you add $1 to a person, he gets one smiley face. But you take away $1 from a person, you get 2 frowny faces. So, so when we take $1 from a person, his sort of disutility or unhappiness is greater than the person who receives the $1. My point is here, if you just by taking things away from people, you create more unhappiness than just giving money to people. So once again, this is I think it's Kahneman-Tversky S-shaped income utility whatever function. You can look it online if you really want to, but that's how it works. You can't just take money from people and give it to other people without causing these large changes in utility. So what these, if you want to ignore these fundamentals, what you would have to do that, you would have to create this artificial situation that basically you would have to be arguing that at some level of income, people hate money so much that they're happy to give it away, or they're happy to get rid of that money. But that is obviously not the case, because if that were the case, we would not have tax evasion. And just to prove my point, I would say that fundamentals right back. These are 3 conclusions from a sort of tax evasion elasticity studies of Denmark, not of some evil country like the United States. Your nice socialist Denmark. Well, the study found 3 things. They studied what people are more likely to evade taxes. Well, companies are more likely to evade taxes than people. One thing. 2, rich people are more likely to engage in tax evasion than poor people. And 3rd, it is easier to push people into tax evasion than to bring them back. So what I think these empirical findings very much confirm what we were doing here. Now, you could imagine this idealized situation that people want to get rid of money because they're very rich, but actually that's not the case. And in fact, one could even argue that the richer you are, the more likely the more you want to evade tax. So that goes, and maybe if we get richer, we're more sort of Scrooge McDucky than Rockefeller. But my point is, this is empirical. So, how to end this? I have a very good quote from that person. He's a professor, forgot where. This is his honest. He's pro-redistribution. He wants to increase taxes. He wants to give it to the poor. But this is his sort of sincere take on it. Yeah, we cannot scientifically estimate how levels of utility differ across people. Good. He's being a good economist and admitting that. We need to make some assumptions about the nature of each person's utility function. Okay, so basically we have to assume that people are. And, my point is what he's saying here, maybe it's not economics as we know it, but maybe it's ethical to redistribute money or to take from one person and give it to another. Now, if people admit that and say this is what they believe in, this is their beliefs, this is their ethical systems, I'm fine with that. You could have your down-to-earth socialists, whatever. But this is I mean, to put it another, this is your opinion. This is not economics. This is someone's opinion that rich should be paid, that rich should pay more than the poor. But that's an opinion. That's not an economic fact, nor an economic theory statement. So what everyone to encourage is to sort of, whenever someone says, it is economically proven, or it is an economic theory that rich should pay more, we should challenge them on these assumptions, and you should actually, if the person's willing to engage in discussion, go down the line of why that is. Finally, some real empirical data just to be sort of more annoying. Okay, this is income inequality in European Union, average income inequality as measured by the Gini coefficient. And you recall the Gini coefficient is that this thing. So what we have here is that this is Gini coefficient of your after-tax income. So basically how much money you have. And this is inequality, basically. This is inequality after taxes measured. To be more precise, after taxes and the distribution. After, this is your disposable income. So red countries are the countries that have progressive taxation. Blue is countries that have a flat tax. So if you looked at this sort of, you could see, countries that have a progressive income tax have in those countries any less than in countries that have. And this is usually the statistic that gets quoted. If you look at Eurostat, if you look at your average economist, these are the numbers that they're quoting, and they say, well, guys, this is the proof for progressive taxation. Or to be more precise, they say, if you want to reduce inequality, you should institute progressive taxation. Seems fine and dandy, but this is a huge logical mistake. This is basically, here we're looking at the result of redistribution. We do not know what income would have been if there were no taxes. We do not know what income would have been if there were no transfers. So put it another way, how can you judge if your house is insulated well enough? You could say, well, it's warm in my house. It's warm in this room right now. But if we don't know what the temperature is outside, we cannot say whether this house has good insulation or whether it has bad insulation. We have to come back, let's say, in winter and see if it's warm in this house. Then we could say something about insulation, or say, how to judge whether your jacket is warm or not. And if you wear a jacket in the summer, it might seem very warm. But you have to wear it in the winter to see how much it reduces the difference in temperature to judge whether it's not warm or warm. So for that, we have this different data. And what this here is the same. Sort of blue are the countries with flat tax, red are the countries with progressive tax. But the blue lines are the incomes before taxes. These are this is inequality before taxes. This is inequality after taxes, but before transfers, and this is the disposable income inequality. So don't worry too much. This is the result of this graph. This is a inequality in different types of countries, in countries with different tax systems. Well, and what does it say? Well, in years 2007, 2008, and 2013, countries that had progressive income taxes, they reduced inequality more than the countries that had flat income taxes. But let's say in 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012, countries that had proportional or flat income taxes reduced inequality more than countries that had progressive taxes. My point here is, if we're really serious about talking about reduction of income inequality, we shouldn't sort of look at this thing, which is just end result. We should look at how much the tax does reduce inequality, because that's how you measure the effectiveness of tax in reducing inequality. And basically, what I want to show by this is that it's unclear. In one period of time, it seems that one system is better at reducing inequality. At other point in time, it seems that the other system is better. So the debate is far from settled, and There are many reasons for this, and I'd allow them in why things are complicated, and these are, I promise, the two last slides. So in theory, it should be that high taxes should reduce inequality, because higher taxes fall on higher income earners more, and their income is reduced more, therefore high taxes should reduce inequality. But if you have high tax evasion in a country, that might not be the case. In other words, remember Laffer curve, remember all these other things. You might institute a very high tax in order to reduce inequality, but if people are able to avoid the tax, inequality will not be reduced. So that might be one explanation why that is. Second explanation, which is actually more fun, says imagine you have employees, we have a group of employees who earn a lot and are very sort of demanded in the job market. And usually those are the same type of people, people who are demanded a lot. They also get very high wages. And they have very high bargaining power. And those people, they usually don't look at the income before tax, everyone looks at the income after tax. So let's say, imagine this is the best landscaper in the world, and you want him to do your garden, and he can basically, he's the price setter. He sets the price for the garden. So the taxes increase by, I don't know, 100% for him. He can shift that increase of taxes onto you as a client. So basically he said, before tax increases, it was 5,000 for your garden, now it's 10,000. You're still paying 10,000 because he's able to shift the tax on you because he's the best gardener in the world. Because now he's getting, his net income did not change because he's still receiving things after tax, but his pre-tax income has increased. Instead of earning 5,000, now he's earning 10,000. In official statistics, these sort of pre-tax incomes of some people have gone up. So you could argue that this is sort of high taxes cause higher salaries, which in turn cause inequality, which in turn cause more taxes. You could argue that at least some portion of today's income inequality or pre-tax income inequality is precisely because of very high taxes imposed on those specific groups of people who are able to shift those tax increases onto their clients or employers. Once again, not everyone is like that, but if you have a sizable population of those people inside the country, and everyone wants to have these people in their country, increasing taxes for them might not do anything. Just someone would pay more tax. But in terms of inequality reduction, you might not have any. Third sort of thing why this relationship breaks down is observed in some countries. Well, imagine we have reduced taxation. Well, imagine some Republicans or proper liberals have come into power and have reduced taxes on high incomes, on high earners. Now some people actually, because the taxes were reduced, now they start working more. They work more, they earn more. Their incomes increase, right? You could say, well, inequality has increased because now the small group of people is now earning more, but they're earning more because they're working more. So is the correct policy response to increase taxation because some people chose to work more? Well, I think not. That is not the type of income inequality you would want to tackle. Finally, sort of a practical example. Imagine you are getting you are a very highly valued employee, and you get your income partially in cash, and after some point you get these kind of in-kind benefits. You get a company car, you get sports membership, you get your golf, you get your golf clubs, etc., etc. And these cars, sports memberships, golf clubs, they're not included in your reported income to the statistics office. These are sort of benefits in kind. And usually, why do these people go into these kind of benefits? Because at high income levels, the extra cash is taxed a lot, but cars, sports clubs are not taxed, right? And imagine the taxes go down, and someone says, let's stop playing these games of cars and golf clubs. Just give me the cash, just give me the money. And that does happen. Once again, if we lower the taxes, people switch their incomes from golf clubs, cars, and sports clubs into cash. What happens? Well, you have lower taxation, you have statistically observed increases in incomes and higher inequality, if you're a leftist, you could say, well, this is exactly what we said should happen. When you lower taxes, inequality increases. The rich get richer. But the trick here is that only observed inequality has increased. In reality, that inequality has existed all along. It was just unobserved because it was in golf clubs, cars, and other things. So once again, there are many reasons why this simplistic notion that if we increase taxes, we're going to reduce inequality won't work. And we do observe that in actual data. Therefore, when someone says, you know, let's increase taxes and get more equality, now you know what to tell them, and maybe you can win your policy battles better. Well, Lithuanian Free Market Institute, we talk about inequality. Cool thing, this thing here, by this book on economics for schools, we have now gathered, we have reached around 44% of all students in Lithuania. So this half of all the kids in state-owned schools now learn economics from economics textbook that we wrote.
And they know about income inequality.
Some, you know, they're 14, 16-year-olds. You don't want to overburden them with things, but there is a specific chapter that are included about income inequality. And there was a, you know, for those kind of books, you have to get this official approval from the Ministry of Education. Then you have to have 2 reviewers who write the opinions. And one of the reviewers says, well, the chapter of income inequality goes above and beyond what is required by curriculum. But, you know, this is advisable for smart kids. So, yeah, so they do know that. So I'll take your questions, and thank you for entertaining, for being patient, and because I was talking for an hour, I think.
I have a couple of questions. Shoot. So, firstly, the first 3 indexes for inequality, right? The Gini, I've already forgot the names of the other ones.
At risk of poverty and quintile ratio.
Yeah, what was interesting for me that you specifically said that you dislike all of them, and especially the last one, right? Which, and then you've proven like they don't really show anything. Mike, what would be your preferred index for showing inequality? Would you have one? And why you didn't tell us about that? And because you kind of framed the conversation, and for example, like this discussion that we're going to have now, in the direction then that maybe the socialists would like us to discuss, even libertarians, we're going to be discussing inequality in terms of Gini instead of something else.
Well, I don't have it. These are not bad indicators per se. There's nothing wrong with them as long as you know their limitations. I specifically use these ones as opposed to my sort of own invented one, because these are the indicators in which people have debates. So I think it's much smarter, you know, in terms of practical application, to know the limitations of those, you know, so you can talk to socialists using these things rather than say, well, there's a Mises Hayek something. So I dislike Gini because of this absolute line of income inequality. And I dislike this one because it's usually misinterpreted. All the media, they skip relative poverty, they just write poverty. But these are not bad indicators per se, you know, as every indicator they have limitations, and it's for a good scholar to know these limitations. But the specific reason why even for libertarians they use these 3 examples is for you to have a better grasp of what, you know, what the enemy knows. See, my first thing I said is know thy enemy. So these are the 3 things they deal with.
Yeah, so this goes to my second question. Why don't libertarians come up with alternative indexes? Because what I see then is that in general, then the arguments are very defensive and reactionist. Instead of proposing kind of like a direction, instead of proposing where the dialogue should go, basically libertarian stance is more in defense, using the same definitions. Social security. Why not call it give away money? Hey, let's call it like that. And then I mean, even the quotation in the end, I mean, it says it's opinion. So why not call it, instead of social security, let's call it give away money, and it just kind of changes the tone of the whole thing. No?
Yeah, it does, but then you run into the risk of people not understanding what you're saying. So I agree with you. Words are very important, but you know, once again, don't fall out of the window. You know, if you go into sort of policy discussion with policymakers, all of which have been educated on these 3 indicators, and you start saying, well, you know, everything that you learned about economics is wrong, and this is the true economics, you know, you're going to be like one of those Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, have you heard of Book of Hayek? So yeah,
Of course, but I'm just wondering, maybe there wasn't an issue, or at least maybe there is like one example or index or something that someone has tried. I mean, if all the
I get your, I do not know. I don't want to say there isn't because I have not looked everywhere, but I kind of suspect this is a sort of, you know, this is like trying to, well, imagine a libertarian version of Nuremberg laws. You cannot have a libertarian version of Nuremberg law. Racial purity, right? You know, what would be a liberal way to look at racial purity? There isn't one, because the whole concept is stupid. So I would say maybe this thing works here. Maybe you know, if we talk about equality and we sort of measure equality as deviations from perfect equality, maybe there is no libertarian way of looking at it, because perfect equality is not a libertarian way of, or perfect equality of income or material things, goods, wealth, is not a libertarian way of looking at it. But I might be wrong. You know, I don't do that much research.
More questions?
So, do we actually need taxes for the distribution, or how does it work?
I mean, in this group, I would say, you know, of course not. But if you ask me from a practical point of view, and what we do, I mean, every day my job is to do the practical things. If I go out there and say, push all taxes now, once again, you know, no one's going to listen to me. Okay, points from this. Many of them have no logical, or have very little logical justification, and it's up for us to exploit those lacks of logical justification. I mean, when you talk to regular people, and you, let's say you explain to them that imagine you're buying in Lithuania and other European countries. Imagine you're buying 1 liter of petrol. You have so this is your petrol cost of petrol, which is around, I don't know, 20 cents, whatever. Now on top of that, you have an excise tax, which is another, God knows how many, 30 cents, and then on top of those, so this is tax, this is sort of, you know, petrol. On top of those, you add VAT. So you calculate VAT of 24%, not only on petrol, but also on the excise tax. So one tax is taxed with another tax. Now, obviously, there is no justification for that. Well, it's just the way it works. But if you explain to people the lack of justification, regular people who have never known what Hayek is, they get upset, they get angry, and say this is bullshit. This should be dismantled. So my practical advice from all that we've been talking about: exploit the lack of foundations for all these taxes to drive home your message. That, you know, okay, well, maybe, you know, in ideal society, maybe a level of taxation should exist, but we really don't care about that because right now, because now the taxation is like this. So maybe we should reduce some sort of taxes beginning with these. Now, your fundamental question, I think, without going very much into libertarian theory, which is not my sort of best field of advantage, I think in the end we would probably come to something like, you know, 10% for police, army, some infrastructure, and people who really need help. I think everyone will be more or less fine with it. But this is my totally personal opinion. I don't base it in science or anything like that. That's how I think. I think if currently, under current circumstances, then people are used to 40 and 50% of taxes. If you said, you know, we're only going to have 10% of taxes and it's going to go to military, police, and really poor people, no one would object to that. I bet even the socialists wouldn't object to that.
From what measurement do you calculate 10%?
Oh, historic. Church tax.
But what parameter? It's of total income,
Sure.
Of goods, or
Look,
something else?
please do not interpret this as Zilvinas from Free Market Institute has determined that ideal taxation is 10%. This is just sort of, you know, something off the bat. Imagine 10% of income. The reason why I'm saying this, and two reasons. Well, church tax used to be 10% proportional in Europe, and it's kind of surprising that it still sort of holds as a sort of reasonable amount of taxation. We've done numerous studies of people, of how much tax would people agree to pay on various different income levels, and we got 11% as an average. But now, this is sort of my personal opinion, so don't interpret it as canon. Yes?
Okay. How much money do Lithuanians in absolute, in total, get per year?
You mean in benefits?
In income?
In income?
Yes.
What is average income in Lithuania? That's the question.
Yeah, it's not exactly, but it's multiplied by 3 million.
So, well, what's your point? I mean, that question probably has a follow-up question, so let's go straight to follow-up question.
I will compare it with Lithuanian budget.
Oh yeah, it would be smaller. Yeah, 10% of all income would be less than the budget of right now.
Yes, and it should be a lot more.
It would be, okay, think of it this way. One way of calculating GDP is adding all income.
All income is maybe
36.
5 million, 5 billion.
If we put 10%, if all the taxes were abolished and we only had 10% of income, the budget would be 4 or 5 times less than it is right now. So yes, the budget, the government spending would be much less than it is right now. On the other hand, if we only spend it on defense, police, social support, and some infrastructure, that would probably be even more than we spend on that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, depending, whom you cut off, how much you spend, but it is possible to finance, a pretty decent state with 10% income tax. But once again, I have not calculated this, I have not thought deeply about this. This is just my sort of guesstimation.
If you would make a tax of 10%, maybe it would be smaller the first year. The second year, and if you commit to it, and the businesses all around the world learn that with Lithuania, we're gonna pay 10% tax flat, that's it. No bullshit, no weird requirements, lots of bureaucracy and so on. There's going to be a lot of foreign direct investment, a lot of businesses coming here, and so on and so on. So it's never a closed case. I mean, it's not the.
It's not a closed system.
It's not
one way of looking at it. Second, tax evasion. The second thing. And then we have numerous examples. Well, let's say in Russia, I think in 2001, was it 2003? Whichever. They went from a complicated tax code to 13% flat tax, and their sort of revenues went through the roof because when taxes are significantly low, the cost of evasion of tax becomes too high. So imagine, I mean, would you really want to hide your taxes if the taxes were just 10%? You just pay it and live your easy life without a fear of the distributions. Now, you are correct in saying maybe those effects are limited, and that'd be a very interesting simulation to see how it works. But my judgment is 10% would be enough. Another good thing is if the state does not spend, then it's where to spend money as opposed to just spending more everywhere.
We have some online questions.
We have several. We have at least 3 online questions, and we have 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. But the first question was asked before you started, in anticipation of your talk, and it says, is there a non-circular justification that anyone has ever given for more equal outcomes? That is, in situations where one person's success does not come at the expense of other people, non-zero sum.
All proper economics is non-zero sum. I would flip that other way around. Socialism and the distribution is zero sum, or believing that this is I think the zero-sum games comes from ancient times when the only way to earn more was to grow more, and the only way to grow more was to have more land. So this has permeated religion, this has permeated primitive thinking about economics, that the only way to get ahead in life is at the expense of others. Slicing the pie your way. Now, modern economics is about baking a larger pie. So this is my easy way to avoid that question.
Second question. A little long. It starts with first some background. I'll use Walmart as an example. Suppose the salary of the CEO were divided among the entry-level US workers, parentheses, under 20 million divided by over 1 million. That comes out to barely a nickel a day per worker, despite the fact that we redistributed income to the point of pretty much putting the company out of business. Is there an example of a country that suddenly decided to take measures this extreme, and if so, what were the results?
It's again not my cup of tea, but I think there was a proposals in France for a very high income, for a very high top income bracket tax, and then they abandoned them. This is a practical or empirical question. I cannot answer that, but my bet would be another example. Back, I think, what was it, 1937? Can't remember exactly, but Soviet Union decided that there should be an equalization of incomes in factories, which that everyone should more or less earn the same. And now, if I remember correctly, basically the whole structure of production broke down, and they had to reintroduce what they called wage differentials, to sort of compensate more skilled workers more than others. Luckily enough, no country is that silly to implement these sort of draconian taxes on higher earners. So that would be my answer to that. But sorry, economic history is not my sort of cup of tea.
One last question. How taxation on GDP, cultural level, wellness, etc. So I'm curious if the progressive taxation has a real positive impact on the lives of the poor and the middle class in these countries.
Well, I mean, from the empirical point of view, nearly all countries in the world have progressive income tax. So that's one way of looking at it. Very few countries have a flat tax to make any sort of any meaningful observations. But if you look at these countries with progressive income tax, and one of the reasons which I did not mention, while I say the country might have a progressive tax and high income inequality, all countries with progressive tax have a lot of exemptions which are used not by necessarily the poorest people. So this is not directly answering your question, but look at any country, look at Germany, look at Sweden, look at other countries. They do have sort of highly bracketed progressive income tax, but they have all sorts of exemptions for studying, for transportation, for repairs of your car, for tax credit, etc., etc. In the end, the progressive tax systems are not as progressive as they seem, and flat tax systems are not as flat as they seem. In fact, you could make the case that maybe even flat tax is more progressive than progressive tax. Because here you pay a lot, even from sort of small incomes. Or put it another way, why do we have progressive tax? So that rich people pay more, or that poor people pay less? And there's a very big distinction, which sort of point you choose. And once again, I completely sort of flipped the question, but that's a very good question, but very complicated one.
And that's the last online question.
One last question, anybody? Thank you very much. That was remarkable.
I'm sorry.